He gave her the only thing that ever kept him alive, without asking for anything in return. The next morning, a wild black stallion was waiting by his fence. The wind had died that morning. No birds, no clouds, just a wide, pale sky stretched over the Montana plains like parchment waiting for a hand to write something down. Sam Walker stood on the porch of his cabin, boots planted, a chipped tin cup of coffee going cold in his palm. He hadn't taken a sip. He just watched the horizon, as if waiting for it to blink. The stillness wasn't comforting. It was the kind that came before thunder, before hard decisions. The kind a man feels deep in his ribs when something's about to shift. Walker's Ridge had never been noisy, but this was different. No rustling grass, no groaning pines, not even the soft creak of the porch boards he'd nailed down 2 springs ago. Just silence, thick and solid. He hadn't known how much sound the world made until it stopped making any. Out by the corral, Daisy stood like a statue, her head high, ears tilted forward. She didn't nicker or stamp like she usually did when she saw him. She was listening to something he couldn't hear. Sam took a slow breath, the air sharp enough to cut, and stepped off the porch. Frost crunched underfoot. The ground still held the memory of night. He walked past the water trough, the barn with the crooked door, past the old cottonwood tree that never bloomed right after Sarah died. The grave sat a few paces farther, a small wooden cross leaning slightly to one side, the name carved in careful, shaking strokes. Sarah Walker, 1839-1883. A single stone rested at its base. Sam had placed it there himself. He nodded toward it now, not trusting his voice. Daisy shifted as he approached. 10 years she'd been with him, longer than he'd had Sarah, longer than he'd had the ranch. Through storm and drought, through fire and blizzard, she'd been the one thing he could count on. She'd seen more of his tears than any man ever would. He ran a weathered hand along her neck, and she leaned into it with a softness that made his throat tighten. "You feel it, too, don't you?" he muttered. Daisy's ears flicked toward the North Ridge. Ghost Hollow. That canyon had a reputation, and not just among white folk. The Crow called it the place that watches. Carvings older than the country itself marked its walls, but Sam hadn't ridden there since Sarah died. He hadn't had reason to, until now. He turned back toward the cabin, stepped inside long enough to grab a rope and blanket. No saddle, no rifle, just instinct and old muscle memory. He didn't know why, but it didn't feel right to go armed. The sun was climbing, but the day refused to warm. Sam let Daisy choose the pace, and she walked slow, steady, as if she too felt the pull of something old waiting in stone. The trail narrowed near the entrance of Ghost Hollow, where the canyon walls rose like broken teeth. Shadows moved differently here, lighter somehow, but deeper. Sam had always thought that strange. And then he saw her. She stood against the canyon wall like she belonged there, half shadow, half spirit. Long black hair flowed over her shoulders, her dress patterned in the style he'd seen only once before, years ago, on the daughter of a Crow elder. She didn't move, didn't startle, just watched him with the stillness of something older than names. Sam stopped, not because he was afraid, but because it felt wrong to keep moving. Some moments a man knows are not his to interrupt. He didn't yet know her name, wouldn't until much later. But even then, long after this day had folded into memory, he would always think of her first as the silence that finally answered back. The woman didn't speak, not at first. Just watched him, her expression unreadable beneath the shadow of the canyon wall. For a heartbeat, Sam thought she might disappear if he blinked, like some mirage born from grief and dreams and too many years alone. But Daisy didn't flinch, and Sam had learned long ago to trust what the mare sensed. He raised one weathered hand, palm out, in peace. She didn't move. Then, slowly, her head tilted, as if considering something she already knew the answer to. "I'm Sam," he said finally. His voice came out rougher than he expected. A pause. Then her reply. "Elena Whitefeather." There was strength in her tone, but something gentle beneath it. A name that sounded like it belonged in this canyon, where stone held stories no man could read. They stood that way for a time, two strangers caught in a stillness older than either of them. When she finally turned and disappeared behind the canyon bend, Sam didn't follow. He simply stood there, as if whatever he came to find had already happened and he'd only just begun to understand it. Back at the cabin, dusk fell early, tugging shadows across the porch like old memories. Sam lit a single lamp, set it on the table beside the worn KJV Bible Sarah had kept near the window. He hadn't opened it in months, until now. The leather was cracked, the spine softened by years of her hands. As he flipped it open, a folded slip of paper slid free, creased and yellowed, tucked between Luke and John. A familiar scrawl met his eyes, written in the tight, careful ink of a woman who had once believed in timing. "Give, and it will be given to you, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Luke 6:38. You always kept too much, Sam. Maybe not in your hands, but in your heart. Let something go one day, just once, and watch what God sends in return. Sarah. He stared at the words for a long time, his thumb brushing the edge of her writing. He could almost hear her voice again, not in his ears, but somewhere deeper. Outside, the wind returned, soft at first. Then it rose, sweeping dry leaves in little circles across the yard. Daisy stirred in the corral, let out a single breathy snort. Not afraid, alert, something was moving. That night, sleep came late, and when it did, it brought no rest. In the dream, he stood on the ridge above the canyon. The sky was burning gold. Sarah stood near the edge, her hair caught in the wind. She smiled, not the tired smile of her last days, but the bright, stubborn one he hadn't seen since the early years. A black horse stood behind her, eyes fixed on Sam, watching, waiting. Then the wind lifted her voice. "You know what to do." He woke with a start, the cabin cold, the fire low. But a warmth lingered somewhere deep inside, a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He rose before dawn. No coffee, no breakfast. Just pulled on his coat, stepped outside, and saddled Daisy without a word. But he didn't ride toward the cattle line or the south fields. He turned her north, toward Ghost Hollow. They reached the canyon by first light. The sun hadn't yet cleared the peaks, but the sky blushed like a held breath. Sam dismounted, walked slowly into the hollow, where the stones rose like ribs from the earth. She was there again, standing beneath the painted cliff, arms crossed loosely, as if she'd been waiting, and maybe she had. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. She didn't flinch. That was the first thing Sam noticed. Most folks would have backed away, or at least shifted their stance, at the sight of a stranger walking into the narrow canyon, but not her. She stood still, arms relaxed at her sides, as though the stone beneath her boots was kin, not ground. Her dress was simple, hand-stitched, patterned with red and blue beads along the collar. Her long black hair moved gently in the breeze, not unlike the raven feather tucked behind her ear. She didn't speak, just watched. So did he. Sam stopped a few yards away, letting the silence settle. Daisy stayed behind him, calm, respectful. He raised one hand slowly, palm out. Not a wave, a gesture of peace. One he'd seen used in these parts before the ranches came, back when the land was still mapped by rivers and stories. "I'm Sam Walker," he said, voice low and clear. She nodded once. "Elena Whitefeather." The name carried something ceremonial with it, like it had been passed down rather than chosen. Sam repeated it silently in his head. "Whitefeather. I don't mean to trespass," he added. "Didn't know anyone came out this far." "This is not trespassing," she said, gaze never wavering. "This canyon belongs to no man." Her English was perfect, but shaped with a careful rhythm, like each word mattered more than usual. It made Sam choose his own words more wisely. "I used to ride out here with my wife," he said, unsure why he was offering that. Elena looked past him for a moment, toward the ridge where the wind whispered through rock. "And now?" "She's gone." "I see." It wasn't pity, just acknowledgement, as if she, too, had spoken with grief long enough to know not to offer it platitudes. Sam exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure what brought me here this morning." Elena pointed, without speaking, to the canyon walls behind her. Sam turned and followed her gesture. There, faint under layers of dust and time, were figures drawn in ochre and charcoal. Horses, hands, circles and suns. Stories that had survived wind and rain longer than any building could. "My grandmother's grandmother painted these," she said. "When I was little, I was told to come here when I needed to remember." "Remember what?" "That we are not the beginning." Sam studied the drawings again. He suddenly felt small, not in a humiliating way, but in a grounding one, like being reminded of where you stand in a vast landscape. "I didn't know this place meant something," he said. "All places mean something," Elena replied, "but not all people remember to listen." Sam wanted to ask her why she was here now, if she was alone, if she lived nearby. But something in her stance said, "Not yet." So instead he said, "I lost more than my wife. I lost the sound of things, the way silence used to be peaceful." "You came here to hear again," she said. Not a question, and somehow it felt like the truth. She stepped forward then, not toward him, but to Daisy. The mare watched her carefully, but didn't pull away, as Elena reached out a hand. Fingertips touched muzzle. No fear, no force. "I had a horse once," she said, "a paint mare, amber eyes. She was taken in a raid 2 winters ago." Sam swallowed. "She saved my life once, but I couldn't save hers." The wind moved around them. Not cold, just honest. "She looks like she would have been a good horse," Elena added, stepping back. "She is," Sam said softly, "and she's all I've got left." And in the silence that followed, something shifted. The fire crackled softly in the cast-iron stove. Outside, the wind had risen, sweeping across the fields in long, tired sighs. Sam sat by the window, boots off, a wool blanket pulled across his lap, the Bible resting on the table beside a half-empty cup of coffee gone cold. He hadn't touched the book in a long time, not since Sarah. She'd kept it near her side of the bed, always marked with scraps of paper, pressed wildflowers, and passages underlined with delicate lines of ink. He used to tease her about it. "You know the Lord by heart already," he'd say. "And still, I like to read him in the quiet," she'd reply. Tonight, for the first time in what felt like 100 winters, the quiet had returned. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that presses on your chest, but the stillness that waits. The kind, Sarah used to say, means God is listening. He reached for the Bible. The leather creaked. As he opened it, something slipped out. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, almost brittle. He unfolded it slowly. Sarah's handwriting, neat and round. "Remember this, Sam. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. 2 Corinthians 9:6. Let something go, maybe just once, and watch what the Lord will do with empty hands. He stared at the words, not because they surprised him, but because they didn't. He'd heard Elena's voice all evening, echoing in the silence like an afterthought that refused to leave. I had a horse once. She saved my life, but I couldn't save hers. The memory of Elena touching Daisy's muzzle with that quiet reverence, like she was asking permission, had clung to him like wood smoke. Sam leaned back in his chair, eyes on the shadows dancing against the log wall. He closed them. In the dream, the sky bled gold and fire. He stood alone on the ridge overlooking Ghost Hollow. But the canyon stretched farther than it should have, deeper, like it went on past the mountains. Sarah stood by the painted rocks, hair caught in the wind, her long dress fluttering like prairie grass. She didn't speak right away, just smiled. That same stubborn smile she gave him when he tried to fix her cornbread recipe. Then came the voice, not hers, not his, but something older. You can't carry what needs to fly. And behind her, the black horse, tall, proud, eyes like obsidian glass. It watched him, not like prey, like invitation. Sam reached out, but the horse stepped back. Then Sarah whispered, "You know what to do." He awoke just before dawn, the room still dark, breath caught in his chest. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming, but the cold air biting at his toes told him otherwise. He sat there for a long while, not moving, the words echoing. Let something go, just once. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just dressed slowly, with purpose, as if the act itself was part of a quiet ceremony. He stepped out onto the porch, felt the wind rise behind him, just enough to stir the tips of the sagebrush near the fence line. Daisy stood waiting, not tied, not saddled. He didn't need either. He grabbed only a blanket and a short lead rope. No tools, no rifle, no plan. Just a quiet resolve. As he mounted, the sun barely brushed the edge of the horizon. The sky was still holding its breath. Sam turned Daisy northward, toward Ghost Hollow, toward something older than himself, something waiting. The first light touched the canyon walls like a benediction. It was the kind of dawn that didn't break. It whispered, unfolding across the sky in layers of indigo and rose. The rocks of Ghost Hollow glowed as if they remembered something sacred. Sam Walker rode in silence. No saddle, no bridle, just the worn blanket draped across Daisy's back and the lead rope wrapped loosely in his hand. He didn't need to guide her. She knew the path. They had ridden it 100 times. Only this morning, Sam knew, it would be the last. He wasn't thinking about the ranch or the work waiting. He wasn't thinking about the years or the empty bed or the letters still unsent. He was thinking only of the promise in Sarah's note, the way her words had stirred something long buried. Let something go. At the edge of the clearing, where the canyon narrowed into the bowl of painted stones, he saw her, Elena, already there. She stood alone beside the ancient rock face, her fingers brushing against the faded ochre drawings. Her posture was still, reverent. She didn't turn at the sound of hooves, as if she had known he would come. Sam dismounted, his boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her. The quiet between them held weight, not hesitation, but clarity. He led Daisy forward, stopping just within reach. "She was never just mine," he said. Elena turned, her eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in the ache of understanding. She took a step forward, then stopped. You don't have to." Sam raised his hand gently. "I know." He offered the lead rope, but made no move to press it into her hand. His gesture was open, unforced. For a moment she didn't move. Her gaze shifted between him and the mare, trying to read the intent behind the stillness. Then she stepped forward and laid her hand on Daisy's mane. The mare didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed her head softly against Elena's shoulder, as if recognizing a story long untold. Tears welled, but Elena blinked them back, not out of pride, but respect. She said quietly, "She will run free again, but this time she will carry more than just a rider. She'll carry memory." Sam gave a half smile. "That's all any of us can do." She hesitated. "Why?" He thought for a long moment, then said, "Because I remembered what it felt like to be given something I didn't earn. And I thought, maybe it was time I passed that on." Elena nodded. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned to Daisy, adjusted the blanket, and mounted with a fluid grace. No words, no ceremony, just motion. As she began to ride, she turned once. Their eyes met. No promises, no expectations, just a silent covenant. And then she was gone, the morning mist swallowing horse and rider as they passed through the canyon mouth. Sam stood alone. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not absence, not grief, just space for something new. A single hawk circled overhead, and as he began the walk home, Sam whispered under his breath, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." Luke 6:38. By the time Elena disappeared beyond the last ridge, the sun had climbed past the canyon's edge. The frost on the grass shimmered under its touch, then slowly gave way to warmth. Sam stood in the same spot for a long while. The silence was no longer heavy. It was light, like a breath held too long, finally released. He ran a hand over his chin, rough with the stubble of a restless night, and turned back toward the trail. Daisy's hoofprints were still fresh in the dew. He followed them not out of need, but out of reverence. The saddle blanket he'd left behind now lay folded beneath a smooth stone, weighted against the wind. And tucked inside it, wrapped in a linen scrap that had once been part of Sarah's apron, was a gift, a small, worn Bible. Sarah's name was still visible on the inside cover. The pages had long since browned at the edges, and some verses were underlined in fading ink. Sam had chosen not to remove the ribbon bookmark. It lay at the same passage he had read the night before. He had left it there not to explain, but to invite. The trail back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Not because of fatigue, but because for the first time in a long while, Sam noticed everything. The way the wind pushed the tall grass in waves. The rust-colored hawk wheeling above the hills. The broken fence post leaning at an angle near the creek bed. The one he'd meant to fix for months, but had stopped seeing. By the time he reached Walker's Ridge, the sun had tilted westward. Long shadows stretched from the barn to the paddock, and that's when he saw it. Standing motionless near the corral, just beyond the split-rail fence, was a horse. Not a ranch horse, not a drifter's stray, a stallion. Coal black, save for the snow-white markings on his forelegs, sharp and clean, like he had stepped through the edge of winter and carried it with him. The animal didn't spook, didn't stamp or pace. He simply watched. Sam stopped mid-step. The distance between them was about 30 paces, but it felt closer, as if something unseen was already bridging the space. The stallion's head dipped slightly. His eyes never left Sam's. Sam walked slowly to the fence, each step deliberate.
He didn't raise his hands, didn't speak. At the edge of the corral, he leaned on the fence rail and exhaled. The horse didn't move. Minutes passed. Then, with a quiet snort, the stallion stepped forward, just once, and lowered his head over the railing. Sam extended a hand, palm open. The horse sniffed his fingers, slow and thoughtful, not as a pet, but as a judge. Then something shifted. The stallion's breath warmed Sam's wrist, and his eyes, deep, unreadable, locked with Sam's again.
He didn't flinch, didn't bolt. He stayed. Sam didn't try to reach further. He simply whispered, not as a question, but a realization. "You came back." He wasn't sure who he meant, Daisy, Elena, Sarah, or someone else entirely. Maybe all of them, maybe none. All he knew was this: he had given something away, and now something had returned, not in kind, but in spirit. And that made all the difference. That night, Sam didn't light the lamp. He sat on the front porch in the hush of twilight, wrapped in his wool coat, watching the wind tease the dry leaves along the path. Somewhere in the darkening hills, a coyote called. The echo came back slow, like an answer delayed by distance. The corral lay in shadow, but he could still make out the outline of the stallion, tall, alert, utterly still. He hadn't moved from that fence post in hours. Sam didn't approach him. He didn't need to. Some truths revealed themselves without force. You didn't chase them. You waited, and they came when the moment was right. Before dawn, he rose again. Sleep had visited briefly, lightly, like a guest who didn't intend to stay. He stepped outside into the kind of cold that stung the lungs and cleared the mind. And there, standing in the pale gray light of pre-sunrise, was the stallion. Not outside the corral now, but inside. Sam blinked, unsure how it had happened. The gate was still latched. No footprints near it, no broken rails. And yet, there he stood, his coat glistening with dew, his breath misting in the air, as if he had always belonged. Thunderheart. The name rose unbidden. It wasn't a name Sam had thought of or heard. It simply appeared in his mind, the way thunder sometimes rolled over the plains, without warning, without invitation. He said it aloud, testing it. The stallion twitched his ears in recognition. Later that afternoon, as Sam chopped firewood, the faint sound of hoofbeats echoed up from the ridge. He stopped and turned. 2 riders approached, one light, one tall. Elena, and a young man beside her. Sam's chest tightened, not from worry, but something closer to anticipation. As they dismounted, Elena's eyes drifted to the corral. The stallion, now resting near the water trough, looked up and then walked calmly toward her. The young man inhaled sharply, his voice low. "He came?" Sam raised an eyebrow. "You know this horse?" "He is Thunderheart," Elena said softly. "He has led the wild herd near Bitterroot Valley for many winters. No one has ever touched him, not once." "Hunters call him a ghost," Elena's brother added. "He appears before storms, vanishes like smoke. Some say he's not real." "He's real," Sam said. The stallion now stood directly across from them, inside the fence. He watched with the same steady gaze he'd offered Sam the day before. No fear, no threat, just presence. Elena stepped closer, not too close. "I've heard the story since I was a child," she said. "My grandmother said Thunderheart would only appear when balance returned, when something lost was given freely and received without guilt." She reached into the pouch at her hip and pulled out a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Slowly, she unwrapped it. Inside lay a turquoise carving, small, delicate, shaped like a horse mid-run. The stone shimmered green-blue, as if water had been trapped inside it.
"This belonged to my grandmother," Elena said. "She told me it would know when to move on and who to move toward." She placed it in Sam's hand. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. In that quiet exchange, stone to palm, gaze to gaze, something passed between them. Not a transaction, not even a thank you, just a truth spoken without words. Sometimes, when you give away the last thing you have, what returns is the first thing you were missing. The late afternoon light had softened, tilting golden over the prairie grass. Dust motes floated in shimmering columns as Sam, Elena, and Micah stood beside the corral, each person quietly absorbing what had just transpired. Thunderheart lingered, his stillness now familiar, his presence more sacred than strange. Elena tucked the turquoise carving into the pocket of her blanket wrap. It wasn't a gift in the ordinary sense. It was a bridge, a testament to something larger than all of them. Micah cleared his throat. "It is said that once the spirit horse settles with a person, the land breathes easier." He looked at his sister. He chose well. Elena didn't respond, eyes tracing Thunderheart's silhouette as the stallion dipped his head to drink from the trough. The creek beyond gurgled softly, the sound deliberate, a confirmation of life flowing again. Sam took a step forward. "Then maybe the land is ready again." The words caught in his throat, but he pushed them forward. "If Thunderheart stays, we should honor that, together." He turned toward Micah. "You and Elena are welcome to camp near the ridge. We can share water, food, fire." Micah glanced at Elena. She nodded subtly. "Thank you," Micah said. "It will mean a lot to my people." He gestured respectfully toward Sam's ranch. Elena approached Sam slowly, not touching him. "He came when balance was restored," she finally said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe that balance starts here." Sam looked at the canyon behind them. The painted figures on the walls glowed now in the afternoon sun, as if they too recognized the moment. "This place will remember," he replied softly. "We better live in a way it can be proud of." Inside the cabin, Sam brought a stack of wooden chairs out into the yard. Micah and Elena sat on two, while Sam pulled the third beneath a starlit sky. Daisy grazed silently nearby. Thunderheart stood by the fence, aware but distant. They shared food, venison stewed with root vegetables, flatbread baked over coals, fresh water from the creek. And along with nourishment came stories. Sam's tales of tending fields and herds. Elena's recollections of her childhood, learning songs passed down by elders under the moonlight. From time to time, Sam caught Elena's gaze drifting toward the darkness beyond, where the canyon gaped wide like an old wound. It felt less dangerous now, more welcoming. A shooting star carved across the sky. Micah spoke, hushed. "My grandmother believed those were messengers. When they cross the sky, a story changes." Sam nodded. "We've been given a new chapter." Later, Sam walked outside alone, coals glowing in the hearth. The fire warmed him, but not fully. What warmed him was the sense that something had shifted beyond the realm of fences and work. He paused at the edge of the yard, looking up at Thunderheart. The stallion watched him back, ears flicking. Sam whispered, mostly to himself, "This isn't just about me anymore. It's for her, Sarah, for what we left behind and what you chose to bring." He turned toward the house, toward the flickering lamp in the window. Inside, the room held familiar silhouettes. Elena stitching something by lantern light. Micah helping Daisy settle. The cabin walls soft with healing. Thunderheart snorted. Soft gratitude or approval, he couldn't know. Sam stepped forward, one foot in front of the other, not alone, but connected. And as the breeze moved the tall grass in waves, it wasn't just wind, it was legacy in motion. "Your thoughts truly matter,"
Don't hesitate to give this story a rating. The morning was breathless, neither breeze nor birdsong, just the hush of a land listening for something sacred. Sam stepped out into the corral with no plan. No saddle, no halter, only his hands at his sides and the quiet between footfalls. Thunderheart stood near the back, framed by the skeletal remains of an old cottonwood. His black coat shimmered faintly in the sun, like shadows refusing to settle. Sam didn't speak. He didn't need to. The stallion watched him come, eyes calm, unblinking. When they were just a few paces apart, Thunderheart stepped forward, deliberate, measured, as if walking toward a threshold only he could see. Then it happened. With a gentleness that contradicted his size and power, the stallion reached out and touched Sam's chest with the soft of his muzzle, right over the heart. Not a nudge, not a test, a gesture. Sam's breath caught. It wasn't pressure, it was permission. Something passed through that touch, not energy, not magic, but memory. Of Sarah's hands, of the weight of years carried alone, of prayers once whispered to ceilings that never answered back. Now there was no ceiling, just sky. The stallion pulled back slowly, eyes still on Sam's. And in that quiet space between inhale and exhale, a verse rose from the far corners of Sam's memory. Words Sarah had underlined in her Bible, soft and fading, like so much of her voice. He rewards those who earnestly seek him. Hebrews 11:6. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't prophecy, it was truth, spoken not from above, but from within. Sam closed his eyes, not to block the world out, but to feel it fully. When he opened them, Thunderheart had turned and was walking away, not in retreat, but in trust. His body relaxed, his gait easy. The choice had been made, not by reins or force, but by recognition. Sam stood there long after the stallion had settled near the water trough, unmoving, because something inside him had shifted. He was no longer simply surviving the silence. He was part of its purpose. Sam didn't try to ride him, not the next day, not the one after that. He didn't reach for a rope or whistle commands. He simply showed up, before sunrise, after dusk, sometimes just to lean on the fence, watching the wind move through the grass. Thunderheart didn't avoid him, didn't come close either. They existed near each other, breathing the same cold air, separated only by time and patience. Sam had seen men break horses. He'd watched it done fast, ropes, sweat, fear. But that wasn't what this was. This was something slower, older, a kind of remembering. Every day, Sam laid a blanket on the rail, not offering, not expecting. Until one morning, Thunderheart stepped to it. He nosed it, sniffed the fibers, then nudged it to the dirt. Sam didn't flinch, didn't pick it up. The next morning, it was the same. The third morning, the stallion left it where it lay. By the fourth, he let Sam lift it again. Then, without sound, he stood while Sam placed it across his back. No saddle yet, just cloth, just presence. Something in the earth shifted after that. A family of bluebirds nested under the eaves again, their warble filling the mornings. 2 deer, long gone, were spotted grazing at the creek's edge. Even the air smelled fuller. Elena noticed it too. "The land is remembering how to breathe," she said one evening, placing her hand against a pine trunk. "It mirrors its caretakers." Sam nodded, eyes on the corral. Thunderheart stood calm, still blanketed, unbound. He wasn't tamed, he was choosing. A week later, Sam rested the saddle gently on Thunderheart's back. The stallion shuddered once, then stilled. By sunset, the cinch was secure. Sam didn't mount. He wouldn't, not yet.
Trust wasn't a moment. It was a series of small, sacred agreements. Every breath, every step, a vow. I see you. I'm still here. Thunderheart flicked his tail, then looked back, just once, as if to say, so am I. The wind shifted that week. It wasn't louder or colder, just different, like it carried a message tucked between the pine needles and prairie grass. Elena came riding at first light, wrapped in layers of wool and memory. She dismounted without a word, eyes drawn to Thunderheart grazing near the creek. "He's lighter," she said. Sam poured coffee into an old tin cup. "So am I." They sat near the smokehouse, the wind tugging gently at their coats. Between them, silence settled, not empty, but full of things neither needed to say. Then, conversation. Not lessons, not debates, stories. Sam spoke of his father's stubbornness, the ridge he cleared with nothing but a mule and a prayer. Elena shared her grandmother's teachings, how to read stars, how certain stones held memory if placed in fire. One taught of iron, the other of sky. Both listened. Later, Elena knelt by a patch of dry earth near the well. She pulled a pouch from her belt, sprinkling ash and crushed sage in a wide circle. Sam watched, arms crossed. "What's that for?" "A blessing," she said, "but not in the way you think. It's not to change anything, it's to notice it." He nodded slowly. "Like gratitude, without the talking." She smiled. "Exactly." In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Sam showed her how to pack meat with salt and snow for long storage. Elena taught him how to braid sinew for stronger rope, silent fingers weaving strength from thread. They traded seeds, recipes, quiet smiles. Not all days were warm. Sometimes a misstep, a word too sharp, a look misunderstood, reminded them they came from different stories. But always they returned, because the land didn't ask them to match, only to move in rhythm. By week's end, a rhythm had formed, subtle as hoofbeats on dry ground. Thunderheart grazed nearer to the house now. Birds returned at dawn. Even the wind seemed to hum softer at dusk. Sam stood on the porch one evening, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold. Elena walked up beside him, arms folded against the chill. She didn't speak, didn't need to. And Sam, staring out across the fields now breathing green again, felt it for the first time. Not as a visitor or a witness, but as a man inside something whole. The land was healing, and so were they. By early December, the first snowfall whispered down on Walker's Ridge, soft, unhurried, as if testing the land's readiness to sleep. Elena's people arrived the same week, coming not in haste, but in procession. 3 families, a dozen souls, wrapped in hides, wool, and songs that traveled low on the wind. Sam didn't greet them with speeches. He simply opened the barn doors wider, cleared space near the smokehouse, set an extra pot on the fire. That was enough. They raised teepees just beyond the east fence, not far from the frozen stream. Micah moved easily between both camps, chopping wood with Sam by day, telling stories by the fire with his kin at night. They taught each other in fragments. Sam showed them how to render tallow, how to trap fox without cruelty, how to split kindling without splinters. In return, he learned how to read cloud patterns, how certain barks could heal wounds better than salves, how silence could say everything. At first, they spoke in signs, in broken words and laughter. Then, slowly, in each other's tongues. One evening, as the sun dipped below the pines, Micah approached Sam with an old book tucked under one arm. "We've been learning your language," he said, tapping the spine, "but maybe it's time we learned the heart of it." Sam took the book, weathered leather, pages marked by Sarah's hand. He turned it open to a passage she had once read aloud beside the hearth, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from knowing. He didn't read the words out loud, just held the book steady as Micah leaned in beside him. Across the campfire, others sat quietly.
Elena, the children, an old woman humming a tune that echoed like water beneath ice. They didn't need a ceremony. The fire was the altar, the snow their incense, the shared bread their communion. That winter was bitter, but it did not bite. They worked. They mended boots, carved tools, watched for wolves, built snow walls to block the wind. But more than that, they belonged. Sam no longer walked the ridge alone. When he looked out, he saw more than fence lines in memory. He saw laughter in the smoke, footsteps in the snow, life braided between breath and labor. They didn't have a name for what they had built, but it felt like a promise, and it was holding. The first real snowstorm came quietly, with no thunder, no warning, just a gray sky that deepened and fell. By dusk, the land was covered in white. Smoke curled from chimneys, the cattle huddled close to the barn, and the world, for once, felt wrapped in stillness. Sam stood by the fence, scarf drawn tight around his neck, breath misting. He could barely see past the edge of the trees. But he didn't need to. He wasn't waiting for anyone. She had already arrived. Elena stepped beside him with her usual quiet tread, boots crunching softly in the snow. She didn't say anything at first, just folded her arms and looked out where the wind bent the tall grass beneath drifts. Minutes passed like that, unhurried, shared. Then Sam spoke. No speech, no build-up, just the truth laid bare like winter earth. This feels right. Elena turned her head slowly, eyes meeting his. She didn't ask, "What does?" or "Are you sure?" She didn't need to. Instead, she smiled with a softness that belonged to snowlight and old songs. It always did. No ceremony followed. There were no rings, no papers signed, but the days that came after carried the shape of something newly whole. They spoke with others in the camp, old Micah first, then the families. A meal was planned, nothing fancy, just food enough for all and fire enough to last the night. On the chosen day, the wind was kind. Elena wore her grandmother's blue shawl, stitched with turquoise and bone. Sam wore the same vest he'd worn to bury Sarah, this time buttoned to the top, clean and proud. Drums began slowly, soft, steady heartbeats of the land. Then a hymn rose, barely audible at first, sung by one of the elders who had once known Sarah. The melody wound around the flames, joined by the beat of hide and footstep. No one gave them away. They walked side by side to the fire, hand in hand, nothing rehearsed, just presence, just yes. They sat together as stories were shared, as food passed from hand to hand, as children laughed and snow fell gently in the firelight. That night the stars were unusually bright. Some said it was the cold. Others knew better. Spring didn't arrive with trumpets or flowers. It came with mud, with thawed earth under boot soles, with the slow, silent drip of snowmelt off pine needles. Sam rose early that morning, as always. The coffee was just starting to boil when he heard it. Hooves. Not the frantic thunder of flight, nor the lonely rhythm of a single rider. This was something different. He stepped out onto the porch, mug forgotten in his hand. They came through the trees in a quiet procession. Thunderheart in front, unbridled, unhurried. Behind him 6 others, wild, dust-coated, unbranded. And at the very end, nearly hidden behind a chestnut mare, was the smallest of them all, a foal, legs too long, steps unsure. Elena joined him at the door, her shawl draped over her shoulder. She didn't speak, just leaned into his side, her breath catching the scent of dawn. Thunderheart stopped a few feet from the fence. His head lifted. He looked at Sam, then the open gate, then back. No challenge, no demand, only a question. Sam didn't hesitate. He walked to the gate, unlatched it, and swung it wide. The breeze caught it like a blessing. The herd stepped in, not as invaders, not as livestock, but as guests, as kin. They grazed close, unafraid. The foal kicked playfully at a patch of moss. Thunderheart stood near the barn, ears alert but relaxed. This ranch, Sam said quietly, was built with boundaries. Elena nodded. So was every story. He turned to her, eyes softer than the morning sun. We were never meant to fence the best things in. She smiled, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Later that day, they expanded the fence, not to contain, but to connect, to give the herd space, to let the land breathe in new rhythms. The children from the camp ran alongside the foals, laughing, stumbling, rising again. And that night, when the stars blinked awake one by one, Sam sat by the porch carving a new post. He didn't name the ranch again, didn't need to. Its name was written in hoofprints, in wind, in lives stitched gently together by grace and grit. And somewhere in the dark pasture, Thunderheart lifted his head to the sky, listening, as if the silence finally had something worth keeping. If you like this video, please comment number 1. If you don't like it, please comment number 2. Spring brought more than green. It brought faces, new ones, old ones returning. Some riding bareback, some walking with everything they owned in canvas rolls slung across their shoulders. They didn't come because they were invited. They came because the land had begun whispering a story they wanted to hear. Walker's Ridge, once quiet as a church after service, now echoed with the sound of children chasing chickens, laughter bouncing off barn walls, and voices speaking 3 tongues: English, Crow, and the rhythmic cadences of Scripture. The ranch wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a gathering. Sam and Elena turned the old smokehouse into a school. Nothing grand, just oil lamps, benches, and a chalkboard someone had traded in from the nearest town. Lessons didn't follow strict hours. Sometimes learning paused for calving, for planting, for snowstorms. But no one fell behind. The children grew fast. They read Bible verses in Crow, translated folk tales into English, and prayed over corn seeds the way their ancestors had done, with open hands and honest hearts. Not everyone understood. Some from the outside called it unnatural, a ranch with no fences for people, no titles for roles, no preacher but plenty of prayer. But those who came and stayed knew different. They saw the way Elena knelt beside a dying lamb and whispered in Crow for its spirit to rise gently. They saw Sam carve wooden toys for the children who had nothing to call their own. They watched a boy with freckles recite a prayer beside a girl with braids, and no one blinked. Micah taught history the way he'd learned it, from songs, from stones, from the way wind moved across sacred hills. Others shared skills: leather tanning, medicinal roots, how to listen to trees before cutting them down. One traveler, a white preacher from Colorado, stayed a week, curious. On his last day, he walked into the schoolhouse, stood beneath the beam where the turquoise horse still rested, and said, "This is what Eden might have looked like, right before we forgot how to listen." They didn't have a church, but every full moon the community gathered beneath the old sycamore tree, where a wide stump served as a pulpit, and everyone had the right to speak. Stories were told, losses remembered, thanks given, and dreams, even soft ones, were spoken aloud. Sam rarely led those nights. He preferred to sit at the edge, his arm around Elena, eyes misted not with age, but wonder. The turquoise horse still lay above their hearth, unchanged, unpolished, a gift not just from Elena's hands, but from the life they'd built. It hadn't moved since the day she placed it there. It didn't need to. Its message had already traveled. Children now carved smaller horses from stone, tying leather cords to them, wearing them around their necks. A new symbol, no longer just for balance, but for the kind of strength that comes from giving. Not for gain, but for grace. Sam once told a visiting rider, "You can't teach peace into people. You've got to live it beside them long enough they forget they were ever scared." Walker's Ridge no longer belonged to any one name or bloodline. It belonged to whoever came willing to share bread, labor, and silence. And in that, the gift endured. The winters came gentler now, or maybe Sam just wore them better. He no longer rode as far, no longer lifted as much, and the pages he turned moved slower beneath his fingers, but his eyes saw further than they ever had. In the mornings, he still rose before the sun. He sat by the window with black coffee and wrote. The notebook had started as a gift from Elena, leather-bound, stitched with turquoise thread. He named it The Ridge and the Thunder. It wasn't a journal, not exactly. It was part story, part prayer, part confession, part song. A record of how the land had changed and how he'd let it change him. He wrote about Daisy, about Sarah's Bible, about the first time Thunderheart pressed his nose against his chest like a benediction. He wrote about Elena, not as a miracle, but as a mirror. The kind that doesn't flatter or condemn, just reflects. Some mornings, children would come by early, their boots stamping frost from the porch. They asked what he was writing. Truth, he said, slow and unfinished. At night, he read his pages aloud by the fire. Sometimes Elena listened. Sometimes she was already asleep. It didn't matter. He read anyway. Some stories are meant to be spoken even when no one's listening. Micah helped him edit. The younger ones helped him bind the final manuscript. They wrapped it in deerskin, placed it beneath the turquoise horse on the mantel. It wasn't for sale, just for keeping. Sam never called himself wise, but one day, as spring cracked the last of winter's ice, he sat beneath the sycamore tree and told the children gathered there. Maybe the Lord doesn't give us more. He just gives us back what we gave, multiplied in ways we never expected. He passed peacefully, not long after, in his sleep, with a pencil still in hand. There was no funeral in the traditional sense. Instead, they held a night of stories, open fire, drums, and songs in 3 languages. Children read aloud passages from The Ridge and the Thunder. Elena stood last. She didn't cry. She just held up one page and read his final line. We are not remembered by what we kept, but by what we gave away without needing to be asked. Then she turned the last page, where only one sentence remained. A verse, one Sarah had once underlined long before the thunder ever came. Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Luke 6:38. And with that, the silence was no longer empty. It was full. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a longing, or a quiet hope, then perhaps, like Sam, you've known what it means to give without expecting. Subscribe for more true Wild West stories that honor the silence, the sacrifice, and the souls who shaped the land with love.